Hi, I'm Stephanie. About a month ago, I started a blog. It's a personal blog, a place to share stories about sewing, painting, house renovations, making candles and soap, and just everything life brings, because every day life has a story to tell. Now that I'm a month into the blog, I've decided to add a video component, sort of like an audiobook, but this will be video for the blog. Now I'm just getting started, so I have a lot to learn, but if you stay till the end, I'll wrap it all up with a final reflection. In my first blog post, I talked about starting over. I suppose this week's topic is similar. It's not that I'm completely starting over with Taekwondo, but I'm starting it up again after a very long break. You see, about 13 years ago, I joined my son Tyler in learning Taekwondo. Tyler got a head start on me. I remember watching his class from the back of the room and thought that looked like a lot more fun than just sitting here in a chair for an hour. So I joined too. And we continued for about 3 years until we moved from California to Arizona. We actually planned to continue in Arizona. We found a new school and went to classes a few times, but something just didn't feel right. I don't think there was anything wrong with the school. It's just that we were going through so many changes all at once that we weren't really in the right mindset to keep going. Our lives continued to change over the next few years. Tyler got involved with his high school marching band, and Jason was playing baseball year-round. We enjoyed our memories of Taekwondo in San Diego. We kept in contact with several of our instructors through Facebook, and we had just accepted the fact that we had moved on. Until Tyler and I saw some posts on Facebook that the annual World Championship competition was taking place in July, but not in Little Rock, Arkansas as we remembered. This year it was going to take place in Phoenix. We talked it over and decided we could go as spectators to catch up with everyone in person. We were pretty excited. It really had been too long since we'd seen everyone. Little did we realize just how much we missed it until we got there. Honestly, after all this time, I never thought we would go back. Neither of us had really even given Taekwondo any serious thought for a long time, and even if I had wanted to go back, I didn't really believe I was ever going to find a school that just felt right again. Although exactly what that meant, I couldn't even begin to describe. But not knowing what to expect, the following week after this competition, Tyler and I went and checked out a new martial arts school here in our own community. The instructor I met with was a 7th degree master, and he even reminded me of quite a bit of some of our old instructors in San Diego. After watching a full class and getting to know just a little bit more about him, I had no doubt I wanted to go back to Taekwondo again. Okay, maybe I still had a little bit of lingering doubt. It had been nearly 10 years since we had even thought about Taekwondo, and that meant I'd forgotten every form, every technique. Yeah, going back to Taekwondo was going to be scary. I knew it would be an uphill challenge, but I had no idea just how challenging it would really be. By the end of July, I put on my old school's t-shirt and my dobok pants and went to check out the new school. It was just me so far going back. Tyler's had some scheduling issues with work to get figured out, and it's probably for the best because I knew I was out of shape. I had no idea, wow, just how tired I was going to be after 2 classes. Okay, so I told myself that to get started, I would just limit myself to going to class twice a week. I needed the time to get my body a little more used to this type of routine again. Apparently, twice a week still wasn't enough rest because after just 2 weeks back, I hurt my knee. I started wearing a knee brace and I kept going to class twice a week. I just toned down the intensity a little bit and realized I probably shouldn't try to keep up with the teenagers. The plan was working for a while until about the end of August. I had this not so brilliant idea of melting down some of my old candles to pour them into wax melts instead. Oh, the idea was good on the surface. What wasn't such a good idea was I was getting impatient waiting for the wax to melt all the way through before I poured them. One afternoon, I tried to pour out a melted candle into a pitcher, but the wax on the surface was still a solid clump, so it didn't come out. When I tried to put down the jar, that solid plug of wax, it shifted, and all of a sudden, wax gushed out everywhere. The counter was covered. I was covered. There was wax on the floor, on the cabinets, and all over me. The good news is I was actually okay at this point. My clothing protected me well enough so that by the time the wax seeped through, it had cooled and solidified, so I was okay. But oh my gosh, what a mess. I had decided that the best way to clean up all the solid wax off the counters and the floors and the cabinets was to melt it down using a heat gun. So a heat gun is a common tool used by candle makers to either heat up jars before pouring the hot wax in or smoothing the surface of a candle after you've poured it. So I still had a heat gun from when I was making candles regularly. So I went and found the heat gun, pulled it out, and started cleaning up right away. And the counters cleaned up fine. Nothing really to report there. And I think maybe that's where I got a little bit careless. I was cleaning up the floor and noticed I had to reach over the pile of wax to pick up some paper towels. And that's when it happened. I was reaching over to pick up some paper towels while I had the heat gun in my other hand. And I looked the other way for just a moment. I don't even remember what it was that I got distracted about, but my arm just sizzled right on the hottest part of the heat gun. Oh, I knew that was going to leave a mark. One evening, about 3 days after the burn incident, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, recording an Instagram story of all things, just recapping my day. I honestly can't even remember what that day had been about. What I do remember was finishing up, and when I was jumping down off the edge of the bed, I smacked my shin hard against the corner of the footbed. I looked down and there was a big gash in my shin. Great! This was now my third injury in a month, and all after coming back to Taekwondo. But it gets even worse still. A few days after just routine first aid treatment, alcohol to disinfect it, put a little antibiotic cream on it and some bandages to keep it covered. Yeah, a few days later, I discovered I was allergic to the bandages. I tried several different brands, but all of them just created so much itching and redness. I don't know how much you can still see of the scar that I have here, but at one time, my whole arm was just a red, blotchy, itchy, gross mess. And all because of the bandages and being allergic. What finally ended up working for me was I took a piece of gauze and I wrapped the gauze with some non-adhesive bandage. It was the stuff that I was reminded of when giving blood or going to a lab, getting some blood work done. And they always wrap your arm around with this stretchy plastic, but there's no stickiness to it. I found some of that, and what a lifesaver that was. I finally was able to heal. Unfortunately, while all this was going on, big wound on my arm, big wound on my shin, knee pain, I started feeling sick. Chills, fatigue, headache, and I ended up missing an entire week of class just because of how I felt. I don't know for sure if this is what was going on, but I have a feeling that this was my body's reaction to trying to heal both wounds at the same time, because I didn't really even start to feel better until this closed up entirely. Okay, a few weeks later, things were finally going well. I was healing nicely, and now I was going to Taekwondo classes 3 nights a week. Things were going well until last week, Wednesday night to be exact, we were sparring in class. Sparring has always been difficult for me, but being away for it for 10 years has not helped me one bit. I was in the middle of a round when my sparring partner just made solid contact with me and just knocked me backwards right off my feet. The hit itself was not painful, but it startled me, and my immediate reaction as I was falling backwards was to put my hand behind me to catch my fall. So by the time I got back up, not only was I still feeling knee pain, but my left wrist, oh, I felt it. I knew I did something. Exactly what, I didn't know, but yeah, I could feel it. It felt sore, but I was able to keep going. I just had a feeling the next day I was going to really feel it, and boy, was I right. I found I could bend my wrist only slightly back, and I couldn't bend it forward at all. Even showering and getting dressed, yeah, that was difficult. And by Thursday night, it was starting to swell quite a bit through here, and I knew I needed to do something, so I got this therapeutic wrap that you could put either heat or ice on it. I didn't know which one would work, so this wrap was great because you could either put the core of it in the microwave or in the freezer. I'm going to be honest and confess that this wrist injury affected me emotionally more than I expected. And I woke up several times during the night because of the pain, and I can't bend my wrist at all. I knew going back to Taekwondo was going to be difficult, but I think after injury after injury after injury, and then this wrist one that was turning to be the most severe of them all, yeah, it rattled me a bit. I mean, think about it, 4 injuries in 2 months. I mean, I know 2 of them were not directly related to Taekwondo, but my confidence was shot. I was worried that every little thing I did was going to result in an injury. I seriously considered walking away at this point. But at the same time, I really couldn't stand the idea of quitting either. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to go to class that night. I was too embarrassed to let them see that I had yet another injury, but I was also embarrassed at the idea of not showing up for class. And also, what if we had to spar again that night? I was thinking I might be able to hide the injury if we didn't have to spar. So many thoughts were racing through my head at this point. Believe it or not, I got dressed that night, loaded my gear into the car, and I drove to class. Unfortunately, when I arrived and I pulled into the parking lot and into a parking space, I could see through the window the students in the class right before mine. They were in their sparring gear. I just pulled into the parking lot and I'm looking through the window and the class before me is sparring. I can't do this again. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 5 or 10 minutes. I was literally frozen with indecision. Ultimately, as the pain in my wrist was continuing to get worse, I turned around and I drove home. I'm not at all proud of the fact that I was overcome by fear. But what happened over the next few days told me that maybe I made the right decision after all. That Saturday was the first big tournament on the schedule since I returned to Taekwondo. No, I knew I wasn't ready to compete yet, but I had wanted to go so that I could support my school and reacquaint myself with how tournaments work. Even though I wasn't competing, I was a little bit apprehensive about what was expected of black belts. Black belts are typically required to stay all day and be available to judge. But after being back for only 2 months at this point, I think the best way I could describe this is I feel like a white belt wearing a black belt uniform. I honestly don't feel like a black belt anymore, but fortunately when I shared some of this with my instructor before the wrist injury, he said I could shadow him all day at the tournament and I could be a scorekeeper for him when he judged. Okay, I could do that. Except that Friday night, the night before the tournament, I had trouble sleeping because the pain in my wrist kept getting worse and it kept me awake much of the night. Saturday morning, I took some pain medication, wrapped up my wrist, got in my car and drove out to the tournament. And then when I got into the parking garage, that's when I put on my full dobok for the first time. I hadn't been wearing it in class. Got a little emotional. I have to admit, the difficult part, besides putting on the dobok, was tying my belt. I couldn't grip the belt tight enough to really pull it tight. That was hard. I did get to the door, and when I walked inside, I'll admit I felt a lot of excitement and nervousness at the same time. A lot of people from my school were there, so it was fun to be able to see everybody and get ready for the day's tournament. I spent most of the day shadowing my instructor like we had planned, and I did get to keep score in one of the rings. But that even turned out to be difficult. I had to hold a clipboard in my left hand while writing with my right. At this point, I couldn't even grip anything with my left hand. And then when all of the kids were finished competing, we handed out big, heavy medals. So I had to hold them in one hand, and then as the kids came up and I would present them with the medal, I had to pick it up and again, grip it to put them over their heads. I couldn't grip anything. It was so painful. And here I am trying to hide it from these kids who had just finished an amazing competition, and I had to smile and pretend that everything was great. Meanwhile, on the inside, I was in some of the most pain I ever remember having. I decided to go to the first aid table to ask the EMT for an ice pack, and the EMT was great. He joked with me and said he would give me the ice pack if I tightened my belt. And that's when I said, yes, that's what I'm trying to tell you. I can't grip it well enough to tighten my belt. He actually tightened my belt for me. I'm wondering if he was actually in Taekwondo too and not just an EMT. So then after he tightened my belt, he took a look at my wrist and ruled out nerve damage, which was good. But at that point, he suggested I go get it x-rayed. He was concerned I might have a spiral fracture, which I guess is not uncommon for the type of fall I had just had. So realizing I was not going to sleep well that night until I knew for sure, I took him up on his offer and we went to urgent care. They took a few x-rays and the good news is, ruled out any sign of a fracture. They also gave me a much better wrist brace to wear for the next few days. Believe it or not, I actually went back to Taekwondo class Monday night. See, I had the wrist brace on and I knew that with that on, I wasn't going to be sparring. Only time will tell if I'm really cut out for this, but it's been about a week and a half and you can see I've got the brace off. I still can't bend my wrist all the way, but it's starting to feel better. And seriously, going back to Taekwondo after such a long break is really hard. See, I think I remember what I used to be able to do, but I forget that my body is 10 years older and it's so much harder and I need to make adjustments for that. Once upon a time, I had a dream of making it to 4th degree black belt. Now I think I'll be lucky just making it to my first midterm, which, by the way, my first midterm is coming up within the next couple of weeks. One way or another, I have got to be ready for it. And that means keeping all of my limbs healthy. Stay tuned. The first thing I want to address is the continuity error. I tried following the original blog as closely as possible, like a script, but I wrote the blog a week before I recorded the video. So in the blog, my wrist injury had just happened a few days prior. So I mentioned in the blog that it happened just last Wednesday. But then later on in the video, while I was wrapping things up, I mentioned that the injury actually happened a week and a half prior. I'm also not wearing the brace anymore, and the swelling has certainly gone down. So because of the time lapse between writing the blog and recording the video, it was difficult to account for the obvious healing time that had taken place, and it was more difficult to stick to the script after all. Something else you may have noticed is this lovely bruise on my right wrist. No, this is not the same wrist that I talk about in the video. During that same time lapse between writing the blog and recording the video, I was breaking boards in Taekwondo class, and wouldn't you know it, I smacked it with this bone right here. Yeah, I'm supposed to hit with this nice meaty part of the hand. Nope, need a little more practice. So as you can see, I've now got this nasty bruise on the other wrist. So does that put me at 5 injuries now? Another thing I wish I had more of was B-roll footage. Those extra video clips that show you what I'm talking about rather than just explaining what I'm talking about. But to be perfectly honest, when these events actually happened, I had already given up, at least at the time, on making YouTube videos, so I wasn't thinking about recording anymore. Oh well, I will try to learn a little bit more with each video that I make, and at the same time be better at anticipating what I need to record while it's actually happening. Speaking of events to record, next week Jim and I are planning a trip out to a pumpkin patch. We've never been to this one before and it's a few hours away, so it'll be a fun day trip. We're really looking forward to it, and this time I plan to take lots of video footage. So until next time, thank you for watching. Sound check. I'm really hoping that this means that you can't hear the vacuum upstairs, but I'm going to go ahead and record it anyway. Something else you may have noticed is this lovely blues. Okay.